When you think of America's Appalachian Trail, a sprawling 2,160-mile path stretching from Georgia to Maine, you likely envision moments of serene family bonding, the exhilaration of physical challenge, and the beauty of the great outdoors. However, beyond its scenic landscapes lies a darker history. The Appalachian Trail has witnessed numerous murders and untimely deaths over the years. While most dangers encountered along the trail stem from unpredictable weather or accidental falls, violent crime is not unheard of. Moving westward, the first white explorers who crossed the vast Missouri were awestruck by the grandeur of the Rocky Mountains, with their towering peaks exceeding 14,000 feet. Indigenous peoples had long referred to these glittering summits as the Shining Mountains, a name that reflected their breathtaking splendor. These formidable heights nearly halted the famed Lewis and Clark expedition between 1804 and 1806. But the explorers persevered, opening the path for the legendary mountain men who followed in their footsteps. Turning back to the Appalachian frontier, the late 1760s and early 1770s saw a wave of Euro-American settlers pouring into what is now northeastern Tennessee and southwestern Virginia. This encroachment stirred significant unrest among the Overhill Cherokees and other indigenous tribes who had long controlled the land. The Treaty of La Habra, signed in 1770 between the British Crown and the Cherokee, shifted the boundary of British colonial territory southward to Long Island of the Holston River. While this treaty placed settlements north of the Holston under British protection, those south of the river were ordered to evacuate. Rather than comply with the Crown's decree, these settlers, mainly concentrated in the Wataga settlement at Sycamore Shoals, the Nolichucky settlement, and Carter's Valley, sought a different approach. In 1772, they negotiated a lease with the Cherokee and established the Wataga Association, the first independent American constitutional government west of the Appalachian Mountains. By 1775, the settlers had purchased their leased lands outright, forming the autonomous Washington District. They promptly petitioned Virginia for annexation, but their request was denied. Later, they were incorporated into North Carolina as Washington County. The British Crown and colonial authorities, particularly in Virginia, considered these land acquisitions illegal and ordered the settlers to vacate what were deemed Cherokee lands. Meanwhile, some factions within the Cherokee Nation grew increasingly hostile as settlers expanded their claims. Among those most opposed to the encroachment was the young Cherokee war leader, Dragon Canoe. He vehemently rejected the sale of tribal lands and rallied a group of about 1,000 warriors, later known as the Chickamauga, to resist the influx of settlers through armed conflict. Even after the Cherokees failed coordinated attacks on over-mountain settlements in the summer of 1776, Dragon Canoe and his followers waged a protracted guerrilla war against American frontiersmen for nearly 2 more decades. When the American Revolution erupted in 1776, the over-mountain settlers, largely Whigs opposed to British rule, braced for invasion. The formal annexation of the Washington District by North Carolina further fueled tensions. Encouraged by British agents, the Cherokee launched an offensive against the over-mountain settlements in July of that year. While some settlements, including Carter's Valley and Nolichucky, were overrun, the Cherokee suffered decisive defeats at Eaton Station on July 20th and Fort Wataga on July 21st, forcing their retreat. Recognizing the settlers' resilience, North Carolina's revolutionary leaders officially integrated the Washington District into their colony in 1777, designating the Over-Mountain region as the original Washington County, North Carolina. The Over-Mountain Men, a militia force composed of frontiersmen, went on to play a pivotal role in the Revolutionary War. They launched numerous campaigns against British loyalists and their Cherokee and Shawnee allies along the Appalachian frontier. In 1778-20, Watagans aided in the defense of Boonesboro and Harrodsburg against Shawnee attacks. During the summer of 1780, a group of over-mountain men, led by Isaac Shelby, joined Colonel Charles McDowell to strike British loyalist outposts in the rugged Piedmont region of northwestern South Carolina. They captured Fort Thickety on the Pacolet River and contributed to the Patriot victory at the Battle of Musgrove's Mill. However, with the fall harvest approaching, most of the Over-Mountain men returned to their farms, leaving McDowell with a small force to continue harassing Loyalists. Meanwhile, British General Charles Cornwallis, fresh from his victory at the Battle of Camden in August 1780, launched his invasion of North Carolina. To secure the region's Loyalist strongholds, he dispatched Major Patrick Ferguson into the Appalachian foothills. Ferguson swiftly routed McDowell's outnumbered force, forcing him to retreat across the mountains to the Washington district. Seeking to intimidate the frontiersmen, Ferguson pardoned a captured Over-Mountain scout, Samuel Phillips, who was a cousin of Isaac Shelby, and sent him back with a dire warning. Ferguson declared that if the Over-Mountain men did not lay down their arms, he would march his army over the mountains, hang their leaders, and devastate their settlements with fire and sword. Instead of yielding, Shelby rode 40 miles to confer with John Sevier. The two leaders resolved to rally their militias and take the fight to Ferguson. On September 25, 1780, several hundred frontiersmen gathered at Sycamore Shoals, ready for battle. Lead for their ammunition had been mined from nearby Bum Pass Cove, and John Adair, a Sullivan County merchant, provided funding for supplies. Local women worked tirelessly to sew clothing and prepare provisions for the arduous campaign. Black powder for the expedition was manufactured by Mary Patton at her mill along Powder Branch, ensuring the militia had sufficient firepower. The assembled force included 240 men under Sevier from Washington County, North Carolina, another 240 under Shelby from Sullivan County, and 400 from southwestern Virginia led by Colonel William Campbell. These troops planned to rendezvous with the remnants of McDowell's army, bringing their combined strength to just over 1,000 men. Meanwhile, local home guards remained behind to defend the Holston and Wataga settlements under the leadership of Anthony Bledsoe and Charles Robertson. On September 23, 1780, Campbell and his 400 Virginians gathered in Abingdon at what is now known as the Abingdon Muster Grounds, near the banks of Wolf Creek. They marched the next day to meet a contingent of Tennesseans at Rocky Mount before reaching Sycamore Shoals on September 25th. As the militia prepared to embark on their campaign, Reverend Samuel Doak delivered a rousing sermon, inspiring the Over-Mountain men with the belief that they were fighting for both liberty and divine justice. On September 26th, they began their arduous march over the Blue Ridge, making camp that night at Shelving Rock at the base of Roan Mountain. The following day, they crossed the mountains via Yellow Mountain Gap and followed the well-worn path down the North Toe River Valley to Bright Settlement. Their resolve would soon be tested in one of the most pivotal battles of the American Revolution, the Battle of Kings Mountain, where their bravery and tactical skill would secure a crucial victory against the British and help turn the tide of the war. On September 29th, the Over-Mountain men divided their forces at Gillespie Gap. Colonel William Campbell's contingent descended to Wofford's Fort in Turkey Cove, while John Sevier and Isaac Shelby led their forces to North Cove to link up with Charles McDowell. The troops reunited the following day and camped at the McDowell family plantation at Quaker Meadows, where they were reinforced by 300 men under Benjamin Cleveland and Joseph Winston. While encamped atop Bedford's Hill on October 1st, the commanders quarreled over who should assume overall command of the force. To resolve the dispute, Charles McDowell was sent to General Horatio Gates' headquarters to request the appointment of a permanent leader. In his absence, his brother, Joseph McDowell, took charge of his unit. On October 4th, the Over-Mountain men reached Gilbert Town, Ferguson's previous base of operations, only to find that he had already evacuated, retreating eastward towards Charlotte to be closer to the main British army. The following day, while camping at Alexander's Ford along the Green River, the Patriot forces received intelligence from a scout that Ferguson was moving toward the British stronghold at 96. Adjusting their strategy, the Over-Mountain men turned southeastward into South Carolina. On October 6th, the Patriots arrived at Cowpens, where they were reinforced by 400 South Carolinians under Colonel James Williams, along with a smaller contingent of North Carolina militia led by Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Ambright. which included Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Hardin and Major John Hardin. Another scout brought word that Ferguson's Loyalist force was camped just 30 miles to the east. Determined to strike before he could reach safety, the frontiersmen embarked on a grueling overnight march, hoping to force a confrontation. With Patriot forces closing in, Major Patrick Ferguson made the decision to fortify his position atop Kings Mountain, a 60-foot flat-topped hill about 50 miles west of Charlotte, near the North Carolina-South Carolina border. There, his force of roughly 1,000 Loyalists prepared for battle. On the afternoon of October 7th, the Patriot militia arrived at Kings Mountain and swiftly surrounded the hill in a U-shaped formation, flanking Ferguson's forces. Around 3 p.m., after an initial exchange of gunfire, Colonel William Campbell famously urged his men to shout like hell and fight like devils. In response, 2 companies unleashed a coordinated volley against the Loyalist positions. Shelby, Sevier, Williams, and Cleveland led an assault from the northern side of the mountain, while Campbell, Winston, and Joseph McDowell pressed from the south. Though Kings Mountain's steep slopes made direct charges difficult, the heavily wooded terrain provided ample cover for Patriot riflemen, whose superior marksmanship proved devastating. Campbell and Shelby attempted to storm the heights twice, but were repelled each time by Loyalist fire. After about an hour of relentless fighting, the Patriots gained the upper hand. Their sharpshooters inflicted heavy casualties on the Loyalists, gradually weakening their defensive positions. At last, Campbell and Shelby's forces successfully reached the summit. Amid the chaos, Ferguson was fatally shot while attempting to rally his men. His death shattered the Loyalist resolve, and those who survived quickly surrendered. The battle resulted in significant losses for the Loyalists. 157 were killed, 163 were so severely wounded that they were left on the field, and 698 were taken prisoner. Patriot casualties were comparatively light, with 28 killed and 62 wounded. Among the dead was South Carolina militia leader Colonel James Williams. John Sevier's brother, Robert Sevier, was mortally wounded in the fighting. Following the victory, the Loyalist prisoners were marched toward the mountains. Upon reaching northern Rutherford County, several were put on trial for alleged frontier atrocities. 9 were summarily executed, including Colonel Ambrose Mills. The Patriot triumph at Kings Mountain proved to be a turning point in the Southern campaign. With his western flank now vulnerable, General Cornwallis abandoned his invasion of North Carolina and withdrew to Winnsboro, South Carolina. In the aftermath, Sevier dispatched Joseph Greer to Philadelphia to deliver news of the victory to the Continental Congress. Most of the Over-Mountain men returned to the Washington District, where, in the following months, Sevier, Joseph Hardin, and Arthur Campbell, brother of William Campbell, led an expedition against the Cherokee to further secure the frontier. Meanwhile, William Campbell traveled to South Carolina in 1781 to support General Daniel Morgan's Continentals in repelling another British offensive. However, he arrived a day too late to participate in Morgan's decisive victory at the Battle of Cowpens. In the years following the war, many of the Over-Mountain men went on to shape the future of the American frontier. John Sevier played a pivotal role in the establishment of Tennessee, while Isaac Shelby helped found the state of Kentucky. Other influential frontiersmen who fought at Kings Mountain included John Crockett, father of Davy Crockett, William Lenore, Joseph Dixon, Daniel Smith, William Russell, and John Rhea. Additionally, Anthony Bledsoe, who had remained behind to command the Holston Settlement's home guard, continued to play a key role in defending the frontier. In 1980, Congress allocated funding for the establishment of the Over-Mountain Victory National Historic Trail, which traces the original route taken by the Over-Mountain men from their mustering grounds at Sycamore Shoals State Historic Park to the battlefield at Kings Mountain National Military Park. The trail also includes several branch routes through Virginia and North Carolina, preserving the memory of one of the most decisive campaigns of the American Revolution. To Eastern readers following tales in the popular press, the lives of the mountain men seemed like something out of a romanticized adventure novel, filled with boundless freedom, daring exploits, and encounters with untamed wilderness. Yet, these accounts were often heavily sanitized, their interactions with Native Americans and the dangers of the frontier softened, their feats exaggerated, and their hardships mythologized. The reality was far grimmer, an existence fraught with peril, hardship, and the constant specter of death. James Ohio Patty, a frontiersman who ventured into Arizona during the 1820s, recalled that of 160 trappers who set out along the Gila River one year, only 16 survived. Fatal disputes among comrades, dehydration, starvation, violent storms, treacherous terrain, and disease all took their toll. However, it was Native American resistance and grizzly bears that accounted for the greatest number of deaths, and in the mountain men grimly referred to as going under. Grizzlies roamed in packs of up to 50 or 60 and had little fear of man. Trappers reported seeing as many as 220 in a single day. Massive beasts weighing over 1,000 pounds and capable of charging at speeds up to 35 miles per hour. Even accounting for their tendency to exaggerate, the dangers were undeniable. Some mountain men crossed the thin line that separated civilization from savagery. One such figure was Charlie Gardner, known as Phil due to his origins in Philadelphia, the so-called city of brotherly love. One season, he ventured into the mountains with an indigenous companion, only to be caught in a violent storm. When the pair failed to return, they were presumed dead. Days later, Gardner rode back into camp alone. Dismounting his horse, he pulled a human leg from his pack and tossed it to a dog, declaring, "There, damn you, I won't have to gnaw on you anymore." From then on, he was known as Cannibal Phil. The stories of Gardner's cannibalism did not end there. According to frontier legend, he later endured another brutal winter in the mountains, this time surviving by consuming his indigenous wife. In this land of supposed abundance, food was an obsession. A starving trapper might gorge himself on 4 or 5 pounds of meat in a single sitting, uncertain of when his next meal would come. When faced with scarcity, men resorted to eating ants and crickets, boiling mule ears in a stew, or soaking and chewing on their own moccasins for sustenance. But when game was plentiful, trappers feasted, consuming until their stomachs, sometimes called meat bags, were stretched full. While the mountain men of the early 19th century navigated treacherous landscapes in pursuit of survival, even modern-day hikers on the picturesque Appalachian Trail have faced deadly encounters. Since 1974, at least 11 murders have occurred along the renowned trail. The most recent case dates back to 2011, when Indiana hiker Scott Lilly was found dead from asphyxiation, a homicide that remains unsolved to this day. 3 years prior, a chilling echo of an earlier hiking murder was nearly repeated. In 2008, Randall Lee Smith, who had served 15 years in prison for the attempted murder of 2 hikers in 1981, struck again. He shot 2 fishermen along the trail with the intent to kill, but unlike his previous victims, they survived. Smith's earlier attack had claimed the lives of 27-year-old social workers Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey. Mountford was shot, while Ramsey was brutally beaten and stabbed. Due to insufficient evidence, Smith served only half of a 30-year sentence before being released, only to commit another violent attack. Even seasoned hikers have fallen victim to violence on the trail. In 2001, an experienced hiker, Louise Chaput, was found stabbed to death in the White Mountains section of the Appalachian Trail in New Hampshire. In 1996, hikers Julie Williams and Lolly Winans were found with their throats slit in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. One of the most tragic crimes on the trail was the 1988 murder of Rebecca White and the attempted murder of her partner, Claudia Brenner. The couple had been hiking together when they were ambushed by Stephen Roykar, a man who later admitted in court that he was enraged by the sight of 2 women being intimate. Carr opened fire on them, killing White. Brenner managed to survive and later testified against Carr, who was sentenced to life without parole, despite the brutality and hardship that shaped their existence. The mountain men left an indelible mark on American and world history. These rugged pioneers, either alone or in small bands, ventured beyond the Missouri River into the uncharted Rocky Mountains, blazing trails that would later guide settlers in covered wagons toward Oregon and California. Their paths would eventually be followed by transcontinental railroads and modern highways, embodied by an unbreakable spirit of independence. These men rejected the constraints of civilization, choosing instead to carve out an existence in the vast unknown, where death could come at any moment and in countless ways. Many of them eventually returned to society, at least in part, serving as guides for the westward-bound wagon trains of the 1840s and 1850s. It is a deep irony that the very men who sought refuge in the untamed frontier would, in the end, be the ones who led civilization into their final sanctuary. Today, superhighways and railroads cross the mountains and deserts over the very trails they once traveled. Their legacy endures, not just in the history books, but in the very landscapes they once called home. And with that, we conclude today's episode.